Hello everyone, and welcome to my updated herbolism guide, where I'll be explaining everything you need to know about in the upcoming Shadowlands expansion. This guide will consist of what you will need before farming, the most optimal routes, what islands are the best for each herb, and a tier list of each farmable location at the end. Now let's get into it, shall we? First, we're going to need to get all the necessary tools that will help boost your herb gathering speed and make life easier on yourself. One of the most valuable things you can do for yourself is to install an add-on called GatherMate 2. This phenomenal add-on will show all the previous herb locations from previous data, so that you can check up on these spots along your herb path for a better quality of life experience. The next thing you're going to need to prepare is the Flora Extraction Tool, which will give you plus 10 herbolism. If you have the old shovel, then that one will still work in Shadowlands, and you won't need to replace it. You can buy the Flora Extraction Tool from Distributor Auutil in Oribus, near the Herbolism Trainer, which is located here. It costs about 2 silver, and the bonus you'll get for it is definitely worth it. The next thing you're going to need before going out and farming is the Shadowlands Gathering enchant, which can increase the gathering speed tremendously. It's a level 10 enchanting skill that can be bought on the auction house for quite cheap, depending on your server. This next part will boost up the process, but is not required if you don't want to, but that is either getting the Sky Golem mount from the auction house or using Flight Form as a druid. These two are both able to pick up herbs without being dismounted, saving you a lot of time, but the cost of a Sky Golem can deter some of you, so leveling a druid to be your herb farmer wouldn't be such a bad idea either. On that note, you could play as a Tauren for the racial that gives plus 15 herbolism and increased gathering speed. These buffs stack with enchants and other items, but are not required, especially when you hit max level and that plus 15 doesn't really matter too much anymore. The last recommended prereq is up to your own personal preference, but it has its pros and cons, and you'll have to decide if it's worth it for yourself. That is turning on war mode and gathering around with less competition, but you'll be prone to getting ganked or killed, which could actually slow down your progress. Also, something to note is that each herb bush can only be picked 5 times before it despawns, so the less competition you have, the more herbs you can gather. Now that we're prepared and ready to go, I'm going to show you the most optimal route to follow for each herb, starting with Marrowroot, which can only be farmed in Maldraxxus. This island has lots of hills and rough terrain, which makes it tough to traverse through. There'll be lots of obstacles in the way, but because of its rocky terrain, it also has an abundant amount of ores along the same path as the herbs, if you're going to be picking up mining as a secondary profession. This map will provide you with lots of ores along the way, but is one of the worst locations for finding herbs because of Blizzard's new herb change, where they appear more often in open terrain. Also, because of the landscape of Maldraxxus, it's going to be hard to get the herbs in the first place, but because of this struggle, other people aren't going to want to go here either. So, Marrowroot might be one of the less contested herbs to farm. Maldraxxus is also home to Nightshade and Death Blossom herbs. The next herb is the Rising Glory, which can only be found in the Bastion. This location has a lot less mounty terrain than Maldraxxus, so it's quite a bit easier to traverse around in. There is one annoying spot which is highlighted in the red circle where the terrain can be quite bothersome, but as long as you follow the path going counterclockwise, you should be fine. If you take this path going clockwise, you're going to be met with some rocky terrain and you'll be putting yourself in unnecessary trouble. Just do yourself a favor and go about this path going counterclockwise, and you'll thank me later. This location has quite a bit of ore spawns along the way, but not quite as much as Maldraxxus, and could be one of the more favored locations for farming. It'll be a little bit more contested than Maldraxxus, but should have more herb spawns than it with the more open terrain than Maldraxxus. The Bastion is also home to the Nightshade and the Death Blossom. Next, we're going to be talking about the Vigil's Torch, which can be located in Ardenweald. This location has plenty of open terrain, with very few hills, making it the best location to herb farm. With more open terrain for herbs to spawn in Ardenweald, this place is going to be the most contested location for herb gathering, as it's easy to traverse around and there will be an overabundance of herbs to take. In this area, you could basically follow the white path while checking around the edges of the map, but make sure you avoid the areas in red. This location is also one of the worst locations for farming ores along the way, because with very little hilly terrain, the spawn for ores is very limited, and in locations where it'll be out of the way of our herb farm. It's the perfect herb gathering hotspot, but it's also going to be the most competitive location with very little side gathering allowed with the limited ores along the path. You might want to try your luck with war mode on to lower your competition, or to try farming here when it's not overly competitive like during off hours of the day. Then this place will be a gold mine for herbs. Ardenweald is also home to the Nightshade and the Death Blossom, with this location being the highest chance to gather the most herbs in one location. On to the next herb, which is called the Widowbloom, which can be located in Revendreth with its hilly terrain, multiple fortresses, and tons of other buildings in the way. This location is a real struggle to traverse around in, with its multiple buildings and walls preventing herbs from spawning. You're not going to really enjoy going through all these obstacles for so little reward. To make matters worse, Revendreth also has an incredibly large amount of mobs everywhere, and you'll want to avoid going anywhere near them. There's only a single solid location to farm from, which is away from the mobs and the problematic terrain, which is on the south side of the map. This entire white circle is an alright farming location, but we're utilizing such a small part of the map that you'll have a hard time finding much herbs in the process. Not only that, but even the ore locations are problematic on this map, because the mobs and terrain are constantly in the way of getting to them. I doubt many people are going to like this location, which may make Widowbloom a rarity, and may boost up their price in the auction market, but you'll also be getting less herbs in general as well. So I doubt it will make up the difference. Revendreth is also home to the Nightshade and the Death Blossom, but you won't be finding much of them here. There's nothing to farm in Orbis, so there's no reason to bring up that location, and the Maw is home to the Nightshade only. But you can farm this herb in other locations as well, so it's not that valuable. When you're in the Maw, you're going to want to focus on doing the objectives rather than farming herbs, so this location is not a smart location to farm, but I'm not going to stop you if you really believe it. Now that we've talked about the optimal farming routes for each island, I'm going to present to you my tier list on which ones are going to be the best locations to farm. Starting with our S tier, which is easily going to go to Ardenweald, which is home to the Vigil Torch, Nightshade, and Death Blossom. This location has so much open terrain, very little enemy mob spawns getting in the way, and an abundance of herbs to find. The only downside to this location is that it's going to be incredibly competitive, but you can combat this by farming during the off hours of the day, or turning war mode on when there's not too many players. No other location is going to get the S tier status, so onto our A tier, which is going to be the Bastion, home to the Rising Glory, Nightshade, and Death Blossom. This place has somewhat hilly terrain with a doable mob spawn rate, and the path allows you to traverse over basically the entire map. This gives you much more room to look around and to find herb locations, and also quite a bit of ores along the way. The route is a bit wonky at times, but for the most part, it's a very solid pick, and can see many players choosing this location with its big range of open area and little obstacles. I would really like to put this next one in the A tier as well, but because this is an herbalism guide, I'm going to have to give Maldraxxus, home of the Marrowroot, Nightshade, and Death Blossom, a B tier rating. Because even though its path is not the largest, and has quite a bit of mountain terrain getting in the way, if you're going the mining and herbalism combo, then this path is a super solid pick with tons of ore spawns along the way of the same path as the herb spawns. But if you're going solo herbalism and Maldraxxus, then this place is just mediocre. An island with too much wasted terrain and not too much room for herbs to spawn. I still think this place is a solid pick and would advise you to at the very least give this place a shot. In C tier, we have Revendreth, home to the Widowbloom, Nightshade, and Death Blossom. This location I almost wanted to put in D tier, but there's just enough space in the pathing to justify it in the C tier. The available pathing route is just big enough to call it worth farming though, but there's not much room to space out and go to because the mobs will get in the way and other players are going to be packed in there as well with you. I would advise against this location until you absolutely need to farm the Widowblooms. The Nightshades and Death Blossoms are better farmed in other locations. The Maw is something that you're not going to be farming as you're limited to a certain duration here and can only come here once a day. Your time here is very limited and would be better spent doing the objectives, but if you find some Nightshades along the way, don't forget to pick them up. Though with that being said, it's obviously going in the F tier unfortunately. That's going to be all for this video. If you have any more additional questions, just leave them in the comment sections below. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time. Peace!